So, welcome to another show. Today, we're talking about ethics and comparing utilitarianism versus deontology. When we're making decisions, there are ethical questions involved, aren't there? And there can be moral dilemmas. And these two different philosophies help us to ask questions about which is the best way to go. Utilitarianism, obviously coming from the word utility, asks us to maximize happiness for the greatest number of people. Whereas deontology insists on doing what's right, no matter the cost. So when we're comparing, we are sort of leaning on ideas from John Stuart Mill in regards to utilitarianism and the famous man Immanuel Kant with deontology. Now, I don't know whether or not you've heard of this, but it's a pretty famous thought experiment called the trolley car problem. It's pretty simple to explain, in fairness, but it can get endlessly complicated when you dig into the details. So, imagine this. You're standing by a railway track. A runaway trolley is heading towards five people tied on the track. You can pull the lever to divert the trolley to another track, but there's one person tied there. So five people on the current track, you can flick a switch and divert the trolley to another track with only one person tied. What would you do? So this is where utilitarianism and deontology can collide with their thought processes. The utilitarian would obviously say, of course, pull the lever. Sacrificing one person to save five maximizes happiness and the end result, or at least minimizes harm, doesn't it? The deontologist would say maybe refuse to pull the lever, arguing that obviously if you're intentionally sacrificing the one person is violating rights and dignities and all of that sort of stuff. But the problem doesn't stop there, though, does it? That's a very simple way to think about this uh, trolley car problem. What if the five people are strangers and that one person is your best friend? What if one of the five is a brilliant scientist working on a cure for cancer? What if one person has a family of 10 while the others are all single? Suddenly, the utilitarian calculus can become overwhelming. Do you factor in people's families? Do you factor in their contribution to society? Do you factor in their genetics? How deep do you go to actually come up with an answer to utilitarianism? And look, you could even change the dynamics of the trolley car problem and say, actually, instead of pressing the button, what if you actually pushed off a fat man off a bridge to stop the trolley, essentially, and save the five people? In theory, you've still got rid of one life to save five, but is it the act of pushing the person off the bridge as opposed to pressing a button or diverting the trolley that makes it ethically correct or not? These are the sorts of questions, as I said, it can get endlessly complicated. But if we zoom in to the utilitarian perspective for a second, it's based on consequentialist theory, meaning it judges actions based on their outcomes alone. So for Mill and for utilitarianism, the goal is to maximize happiness and minimize suffering for as many people as possible. That means pulling the lever, doesn't it? But again, are there more questions here? What kind of lives are these people leading? Are you saving a murderer and or many murderers, and you're killing a decent human being, or someone who is depending on this person? Do you look at them at that point in time, or are you looking at their future potential? People often say, don't they, kill the old person and let the young one survive because they've got a whole life in front of them. But what if the person who's old has spent their whole life finding a cure for cancer and they're a week away and you're just going to get rid of all of that? Again, there's so many complications that can arise. What about higher and lower pleasures as well? Someone, you might save someone who's bringing immense joy to others or helping people, artist, teacher, whatever. Might that outweigh saving five people who don't bring as much collective happiness or productivity to society? And again, you can go even further than this. Would it be okay to harvest one healthy person for their organs to save five sick patients? Just think about that. Five people on their deathbed, you've got one healthy individually, or one healthy individual rather. Do you kill that person to save the five? What if a lie could prevent a panic that might harm thousands? Obviously, when at the extreme ends, utilitarianism asks us to reduce every person to a unit of happiness or to their utility, doesn't it? Is that right? Does that feel right? Now, on the other side, the deontological perspective, for Kant and this way of thinking is to about adhering to universal rules, what he coined as the categorical imperative. Such principles are non-negotiable, regardless of the outcome. So if you can, he would say, well, actually, pulling the lever to intentionally kill someone is wrong. It violates inherent dignity. It's not about the numbers or the outcomes. It's about respecting each individual as an end in themselves. So in real life, it's kind of like human rights, isn't it? In some respects. And he insists that people cannot just be sacrificed for the greater good. But again, other challenges there as well. Does it make sense to let five people die to avoid intentionally killing one? Again, doesn't that make some sort of logical sense, possibly? You don't know. What about situations where rigid rules lead to immense harm? Is it too inflexible and doesn't take into account real life scenarios? Who knows? So, a big criticism of utilitarianism is its complexity. Because, as I said, look, coming back to the trolley car problem, it's a really good way to try and understand this. Is family, like the person on the track, family connections. How many people would grieve for each person on the track? Societal contributions, is one a doctor, a teacher, whatever. Popularity or relationships, who's going to miss that person? Potential future, as I said, potential of that person. Do you prioritize someone with a genetic trait or better genetics so that you are improving human beings over the long run? Or do you just go with the youngest or, again, male, female? There's so many different ways you can think about this. Or someone with the best job, paying most tax. Obviously, this kind of reasoning and trying to deduce it by any means necessary seems heartless, doesn't it? Just looking at them for what they are and what they can provide, rather than valuing them as individuals. Is it something we should be calculating like this? So there are some sort of real world examples. Think about utilitarianism during the COVID pandemic, and we can go into all sorts of discussions with that, but let's just look at it on the face of it. They implemented lockdowns to minimize deaths, even if it caused economic and mental health hardships. That was their justification, the utilitarian, best for everyone. But did those policies go too far in prioritizing some sort of collective health over individual freedoms? In respect of everyone was quarantined, should it maybe have been those who are ill quarantined and everyone else can do what they want? Again, maybe a conversation for a different day, but you start to think about these sorts of things now, aren't you? What about deontology? Human rights laws emphasizing that every person has dignity and must be treated fairly. So, for instance, torture is widely condemned under deontology, even if it might extract information that could save lives, because it's morally incorrect to torture someone, even if that information is going to be really valuable to you. You can start to see a real distinct difference, can't you? One is about being cutthroat and Machiavellian in some respects, and the other is about being a decent human being, even though being the utilitarian may actually give you a better outcome in some ways. But again, look at it a different way now. Modern dilemma of self-driving cars, which are around the corner. In honesty, how would you program the car? Should the car swerve to save five pedestrians, but risks killing its passenger? So same trolley car problem, isn't it? 5-1, killing one and saving five. But again, do you look at the ages of the people? What's the risk of them surviving? If they're going to die, are they going to be vegetables, etc.? How do you input that information into a computer to calculate? Because at the end of the day, you have to program in all these variables. Oh, you should kill someone if they're older. Okay, but then what if they have this going on? Does it come down to how high they are up the let's say corporate ladder or universal ladder, whatever you want to say? Because obviously they would save a president and kill a 5-year-old because of their status and how powerful they are. But yeah, I mean, coming back to the five pedestrians and the passenger on the self-driving cars, a utilitarian would obviously say yes, kill the passenger and save the pedestrians. Deontology wise, you might say, well, actually, the car has a duty, doesn't it, to protect its passengers, regardless of what happens. Or is it somewhere in the middle of these two things? Another thought experiment or offshoot. Imagine you're a doctor with one life-saving dose of medicine, just a single dose. You have two patients. One's a child with their whole life ahead of them, and the other is an elderly scientist working on climate change solutions. Kind of what we looked at earlier, isn't it? Who gets the medicine? Would you choose on based on utilitarian reasoning, maximizing happiness for the greatest number, or do you follow the Kantian principles and refuse to weigh one life against the other? So there's two distinct ways, isn't there? You can see to navigate moral dilemmas. Utilitarianism tries to get us to think about the bigger picture and the outcomes and looking at it as a mathematical, logical problem. Whereas deontology keeps us grounded in principle of fairness, dignity, humanity, morals, ethics, and being someone who does the right thing for the right reasons, possibly. You'll know if everyone's seen Game of Thrones. There's a difference in there, isn't there, between someone who is a utilitarian and someone who's deontological. Think about any of the characters. Try and because of the way that it's written, you'll start to notice the way that each character thinks on an ethical basis. How can you start to think about this in your own life as well? Most of us actually use a blend of these approaches, don't we? Balancing outcomes with our sense of duty and trying to do the right thing at the right time. So, which side do you fall on predominantly, or are you slap bang in the middle?